Hello guys, welcome to today's tutorial. Today we'll continue our banking application API, and today we'll be talking about exception handling. We'll be talking about how to handle exceptions, how to format, how to send, how to catch exceptions that is thrown from our controllers, from the class. You can name it anywhere from your Laravel application that you are sending back to the client. That's what we'll be doing today. So what we are going to be doing is we are going to be making use of our utility class that we created in the previous lecture to send out a formatted response to the client. Then also we'll be logging the errors the into the logger for Laravel, our Laravel log. So let me just start. Let's start. So where we'll be catching exception is basically inside the file called exceptions, uh, inside the folder called exceptions, which is just a subfolder under the app directory. So if you look at this exception, the handler class, it has some methods, some fields, and all, but that is not. So what I want to show us is so I've already imported the response traits into the application. So this will allow us to be able to call all the method that is inside our API response traits. So the next thing we need to do is let's check our base handler. So our base handler contains a method that we actually need to override here. No, sorry. I want to search for it like this. Render. So if I look for it, so this is the render method that we need to override. So this method renders an exception into HTTP responses. So I will just copy it, copy, then I'll go back to the handler folder. So in the handler folder, I'll paste, open the curly brackets, close. So now you know that in PHP you can actually call a method behind you can actually call a method in your base class that you extended. So we can still call the method in our base class by saying parent render. So it will accept the request and it will also accept the exception. So that way we return. So if you come here, so let me just show you something. Where is our postman collection? Okay, our postman is there. Let me just put it right there. So our postman collection, as you can see, so let me try to perform let me try to raise an exception. Let me go to our authentication controller. So in our authentication controller, I've created this line of code on line 19, calling the create method on the user model without passing any value. So we are expecting this to actually throw an exception. So if I hit this, we get general error and we get field name doesn't have a default value. That's because the field name on the user table is not nullable. So we can see that we have a type of exception called query exception. So we can easily intercept this and format it to our preferred exception. So let's go to our handler method. So the first thing you need to do is you have to check if the user is actually expecting JSON. That is, the request is expected to, the response is expecting JSON. So that way, even if tomorrow we decide to actually render views in our application, I mean Laravel Blade template, we can still go ahead. So we check if it is expects JSON, then we do if the exception thrown. So if it's expect JSON, so let me just die dump the exception to be sure that we are actually where we should be. So you can see now the exception is being die dumped. So let's undo it. So the first thing I want us to do is let's log it. Log error exception. So any exception that actually comes into this if statement will be undooed, will be logged in our Laravel log. So let's try this. If exception instance of query exception, we can say return our own response formats. API response. Our API response is expecting data. In our data, we'll have message. I'll call it could not, let me say, could not execute query. Then also we'll have success, which will be false. Then we'll also have the exception that happened. Then we can also send the error code. So our error code here, HTTP, let me see, HTTP. Okay, I'm looking for the response class. I want to get response symphony component, HTTP 500. Let me see, HTTP internal server error, right? Then also we can say then also we need to let me pass this. Let me say status code. Let me save this in a variable. So we can reuse this here. Status code. Then we pass the actual status code, because if we don't pass, let me just try this. If you don't pass the status code, it is going to come as 200. So let me just show you. Okay, so it works. So the reason why it is working is because if you check you can see that it is now formatted. The messages could not execute query, which is what we say. Our success false, then our exception is added. So if we check the error code, the error code is 500 as well. So that's perfect. So what we can do is now in situations where if we check our API response pass given data function, there is a way we are checking here. If the status code is 200, then we want to change it to 500. That's why our status code is actually changed. So you can see it has a default of 200. So let's go back to the handler. So this is how you actually format and you send the code that you want. So status code. So I can do this. So we can catch another exception. So let me force another exception. Let me go to the authentication controller. Then I'll go to the user register requests. I'll try to send a user data that already exists. Let me check the DB. Let me check for a user that already exists. Yeah. So this phone number already exists and John Doe 1 already exists. So let me try to send it to the server. Copy, paste, John Doe 1. I don't even need to. So if we return this now, this is 1. Change this to 1 as well. If we hit this, I think we should not be getting that error. So let me just go back to our error. So let me comment this out. Okay. So let me go to our authentication controller back. So this particular error is still being queried. So what will happen is once we send this, because the email and the phone number already exist, our database is going to throw an error since we have unique constraints set on the database. So now you can see we are getting uh, duplicate entry exception. Duplicate entry exception. So what we can do is there is a particular type of error that is actually returned when duplicate entry happens in our database. So if I comment this, you see the exception that I'm really looking for. So you can see we are getting unique constraint violation exception. So we can then, so before our exception, because this unique constraint violation is a function that actually extends query exception. That's why the query exception is able to actually return it, because it's still an instance of it. So what we can do is before handling query exception, which is like the base for returning query exceptions, you can say unique constraint violation exception. So we can just call this duplicate entry found. Yeah. So if you come back here, return. Now you see our error is formatted, and now just so you know, now you can see that this is still, just so you know, you can decide not to send this exception by changing your local environment to production. So that means when you deploy, these exceptions are not expected to be shown to the users. You have to change this to production. And once you are in production environment, this exception key will not be sent to the user. So you can see it just gets duplicate entry. So if we check our logs, we can easily check our logs, our storage log. We check our logs, our Laravel log. If you go to right, let me delete all of this and request again. Yeah, you see production error, integrity constraint. So as a backend person, this is where you come to check if this is where you come to check basically for those exceptions that were logged. So basically that is it. So let me go back to the handler. So now that we are handling that, so what exception should we undo again? So let me try to undo model not found exception. If, okay, let me just model not found. So if exception instance of, well, let me try to fire it before I undo it so that you understand what I'm trying to say. Authentication controller. So if we try to do this, user, let's say you want to get a user that does not exist. Query, find or fail, right? I want to get a user with ID of this, which quite all right, we don't actually have in our database, right? We don't have a user with that ID. If I fire this, now you see no query result for this model. What kind of error is being returned? We have the not found exception from Symfony, not found exception. So we can undo this error. So let's go to our handler again. So we can say if, now another thing that you need to notice is this is already returning 404. So if we undo it, $exception instance of, it is under HTTP kernel exception. So H not found exception under HTTP kernel. We can say return. So because this is a 404, we will change this to HTTP not found, right? Okay, so we can call this resource. We can say resource could not be found, right? So if we come back here, okay, this is not been handled yet. Let me see, let me see, let me see, let me see, let me see. Exception, instance of not found exception, HTTP kernel, HTTP kernel, it's symphony compatibility kernel exception, not found exception. Why is it not picking it? Let me DD. I think it's not entering here. It is. Oh, it's model not found exception. Sorry. So it is model not found. Oh, I come model not found exception. So that's the error that we are getting. No query results. So if we come back here, try to do this. So we get, you can see result could not be found. So let's return our exception. Let me go back to our env and change it to local, right? Come back. Now, bam, you can see we have that error supplied to us. So okay. So this is basically how we actually handle different exception. So during the course of this tutorial, I'll be handling more exception. I'll be showing us how to actually display them. So a quick one, a quick one. So in situations whereby probably we did not undo the particular type of exception that is being thrown, what we can do is to now use the base exception provided to us by PHP itself. All exceptions are an instance of this, or is either an instance of this exception or an instance of this except of error. So these are base classes from PHP. So we can then call these, we can just say, an error occurred. Please try again later. An unknown, let me call it unknown you can actually call this anything you like. This is just my own verbiage. An unknown error occurred, please do this, blah blah blah. So I can copy this. So, or we can just say a more friendly message. We could say we could not undo your requests. Please try again later. Basically, we could actually do that as well. So let me just copy and paste. So anytime we actually throw an exception or an exception that we did not undo, we can easily just send this back to the user. So one last exception that I would like us to undo is the validation exception. So validation exception. which is actually thrown when a validation fails in your application, in your Laravel application. So let me go back to this. Let me Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z. So basically, if I try to send this now, now you can see we are getting a validation exception, but because we did not undo the validation exception, it is being captured by one of our method down here. So in order to prevent that from happening, we can say if exception is an instance of validation exception, is an illuminate validation exception, we can say let's return am. So let me copy the status code. Status code. So our status code now, okay, we said this to not found. So okay, come to think about, okay, we'll get there. So validation exception, if we throw it now you see, we are getting resource not found, but that's not what we want. Oh, we need to change this message. We need to change this message to something like validation failed. So if we hit this again, validation failed, then we need to, instead of just error code, we need to attach the errors that actually occurred. So we can say exception errors. So this is basically a method provided to us by the Laravel validation, Illuminate validation exception itself. So if we do this now, you can see we have the errors, we have the message, we have the success. So basically that is it. Yeah, that is it. So now I want you to you can see we are still seeing internal server error here. So that is why we must pass the response code that we need. So if we do this status code, if you check this, we see that this is expecting a status code as second variable. So if we pass this, now we see that we have the not found, but it is not found that we want. We want unprocessable entity. Unprocessable entity. So if we do that, we get unprocessable content. So so I think that is it. So let me try to do something. So you can see our resource not found is still returning internal server error. So which is this guy. So we need to also do the same thing here. Status code. This is not an internal server error. So you see we have not found. So this our error is still throwing. So if we go back to our authentication controller and remove this guy, we can then go ahead to create our user. Bam, we have our user. So that will be that will be the end of today's tutorial. And I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you know how to undo exceptions in your Laravel application by using the render method in the exception handler. I know there are a couple of ways to do things, but this is the way that I know. I'm more than happy to hear your suggestions. Or please, if you enjoy this video, kindly subscribe and share with your friends so that they can up your game in the development of API. So the main thing I want us to see is how we are sending a proper data, a formatted data to our users. They can always know what to expect from us. They can always know what to expect from us. So all right. Later, see you in the next video where we'll be talking about authentication, how to the form of authentication we'll be using to undo our application. Thank you. Bye.